All right, I am joined by the Dennis Cometto of this pod, Alex Sear, reporting from somewhere in Florida. And our Paula Radcliffe, Katelyn Tossi in Costa Rica. And I am your one and only Ryan Hall in Toronto. Guys, what did those three superlative runners of the past have in common, besides the fact that they're all retired and one of them is a jacked weightlifter now?
Wild choices, I was going to say. Is it that they've all held some sort of marathon record? Like Ryan Hall had the American one, Cometto and Radcliffe had the world ones. Is this it?
You got it. So yes.
Nice.
So these are three running stars of the past that held big time distance running records of some kind at the dawn of the super shoe era, the last pre-super shoe record holders. And the reason why we did that intro is today we're going to talk all about, we're actually going to bring in a special guest, the Marathon Handbook founder and CEO, our boss man, Thomas Watson. He's going to join us because he's been writing a weekly column the last couple of weeks, which is excellent. And his column this week is all about a personal dilemma that he is facing, which led him to think a lot about super shoes, the super shoe era, and the piece is entitled, "It Turns Out Super Shoes Don't Make You Faster." So we're going to pick his brain all about why he wrote the column, what his findings were, and we're going to, I think we're going to probably find ourselves having a bit of a debate, guys, because I have a sense one person in this pod feels very strongly in favor of super shoes, and then I'm really curious to find out what others think. And Thomas is obviously very conflicted. But first, guys, let's talk a little bit about the Tokyo Marathon. The first major, 2025, is coming up. It's all starting. This signals the beginning of the marathon season. It happens on March the 2nd. The elite fields were announced this week. Our teammate, Jesse Carvith, our news editor, put out a story highlighting the entire elite field, both men's and women's. And this race is smoking hot.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for you guys.
Okay.
Is this field better than the London Marathon field, which has been so hyped in the last couple of weeks because of the incredible trio of women that are running the marathon? But is this, when we're all done this marathon season, will Tokyo be the fastest race of the year in either the men's or the women's race?
I have to say, okay, let's focus on the women. I have to say no, because we're just missing the obvious two big players, right? Tigges Josefa and Ruth Cheptegei, by far the two fastest women in the world. This is the best of the rest, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say it's not going to
Best
be
of
fast.
the rest.
You could have,
Tokyo.
if we're staying gender specific, Michael, you could have introduced Katelyn as Bridget Kosgei, because she also used to have a record, though I guess maybe it was in the super shoe era. So
that was
it doesn't
definitely
count.
in the super shoe era.
Yeah. So I guess she doesn't qualify for this, but like to have a marathon with Bridget Kosgei as one of the very top athletes, and then two others in that 216 low, 215 high range, and have it considered a second-rate type of marathon is crazy. But you have three women who are going to chase sub 216. So, I mean, it's not like we don't have absolute world-class runners there. So it's going to be fast.
I think the neat thing, and it's always nice to see a marathon major do this, is they've brought back the three previous winners to show up and compete against each other. So I think that's kind of exciting, and that will build in the storyline feature with all of this. On the men's side, we'll do a complete deep dive preview all about the Tokyo Marathon, as we will do with every marathon major this year, as we did last year as well. So we'll do that the week of Tokyo, so that the Thursday at the end of February, the week leading into Tokyo, we'll unpack the race in all of its detail. We'll go into the history, what the course is like, what the experience, how the heck you'll watch it, which can be tricky. But Katelyn, the men's side, we've got also like a good amount of depth. And Joshua Cheptegei.
He's going to give it another go.
He's giving it another go. So if you're not familiar with the name Joshua Cheptegei, he was the Olympic 10,000 meter champion last year, I guess, in Paris. But he's tried the marathon and I think it probably didn't go according to plan for him.
Yeah, even though we can't even imagine or wrap ourselves around the time, which was 2:08, I think 59 that he ran in Valencia. It still just wasn't quite as fast as getting up in those top guys. So for him, I'm sure that he saw that as a bit of a disaster. So let's see if he can come back in Tokyo, give it another go, and get up into those low, 2:02, 2:03, up with the top guys.
I'm waiting to see if he is going to be a Eliud Kipchoge or a Mo Farah, a dominant.
Whoa, okay.
We'll get more. Yeah, we'll get more into this next time. But it's like you have a super dominant track runner who could follow in Eliud Kipchoge's footsteps and become an even better marathoner, or he does the Mo Farah thing where he dominates the 5 and 10K for a number of years and then never quite translates it to the marathon. And I think marathon number 2 is weirdly quick enough to have people start to form an opinion about which route he's going to take. And so if I'm Cheptegei, man, I'm feeling the pressure for Tokyo.
Yeah, of course, because you think, okay, he maybe used Valencia kind of like to get his feet wet. So you can kind of chalk up the first one to being like, okay, this was my practice. This was to kind of get in the swing of things, to feel the marathon distance for the first time in competition. But now the second one, like you said, the pressure's on. The pressure's on because you can't have 2 subpar marathons, right?
Duds.
So now we're going to see what happens.
2:09. Yeah, like what? I mean, we'll get into like what would success be for a guy like this. We should say he is the current 5 and 10,000 meter world record holder.
Yeah,
he's a generational absolute superstar. I mean, we thought maybe that he was retiring after Paris. Turns out he was just retiring from the track. So it's good news that he's coming and trying the marathon, giving it another kick at the can here in Tokyo. Bit of a safe space for him, Tokyo. It's like a little bit of Tokyo sort of sneaks up on you, right? It doesn't have the pomp and circumstance that Boston or London get in April, but it's a fast course and an extremely obviously well-organized event. One little number to keep in mind, a little like teaser, a little amuse-bouche for when we do our Tokyo preview. If you were to take Joshua Cheptegei's 10,000 meter world record and do a corresponding marathon time, just purely based on his world record in the 10,000 meters, corresponding time is 2 hours, 39 seconds. That's 4 seconds off the world record.
Yep.
Okay.
Which is interesting. So obviously a ton of promise, but as we know, the marathon is a cruel mistress. And I'm sure you can speak to that. Okay. And one final thing we should say about Tokyo before we pivot here is this sort of begins or unlocks the marathon major season, which will be significantly different this year because we've got a new addition. We've got a race in Sydney that's been added to the marathon major circuit, and that's going to be the first fall race. So it's taking place August 31st. So it used to be that like you do Tokyo, you do Boston, you do London. We all take a little breather.
Break.
Summertime. And then you used to do Berlin and then Chicago and then New York. And now it's Sydney, Berlin, Chicago, New York. So that's going to be exciting and crazy demand for Sydney. I read this week 79,000 applicants for the 35,000 positions to run Sydney.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's amazing that the pixie dust of becoming a marathon major, and all of a sudden everyone wants to do it, right? Okay, so let's take a quick break. And then we're going to get into one more opening topic before we bring Thomas in to talk about super shoes.
Maybe an open-toed topic, if you will.
Oh, well played, sir. We're going to talk all about super sandals, super flops,
Super Crocs.
Yeah.
Super loafers. We're going to talk about a very weird trio of running footwear related stories that we had on the site this week. We'll be right back with a Croc segment. Be right back. Before we get back into the pod, I want to tell you about our live show that we're doing in Boston on March 1st, 1:30 p.m., live on stage. Alex, Katelyn, and I will be together again in person. The Boston Run Show. Boston Run Show is a pretty cool event. Lots of major brands there showing off all of their gear and their upcoming shoes. Brands like Asics, Adidas, New Balance, Saucony, they're all going to be there. So it's kind of like a running expo minus the pressure of having to run a race on the Sunday morning. So you can come, buy tickets, walk around for the weekend, check out all the gear. There's some incredible speakers there. Laz Lake, who invented the Barkley Marathons, he's doing a keynote. Des Linden, Meb Keflevsky, Boston Marathon champions and all-time American greats. They're going to be there doing talks as well and many more. So check out in the show notes. I'll put a link in there for you if you want to buy tickets, if you're in the Boston area or happen to be there on the weekend of March 1st and 2nd. We're doing our live pod at 1:30 p.m. So, and we'll put it out. We'll put it out on the feed later on in the week so you can listen to the live pod. But come check us out. Meet up with us. Hang out for a little bit afterwards. Obviously, if you're looking for a fun running weekend, come to Boston in the first weekend of March. It's going to be awesome. All right, back to the show. All right, and we're back. Gang, what the hell is going on with running footwear in the last week? I feel like we've all lost our minds. In the last 7 days, we have had 3 stories on our site about the following. Something called the super sandal, or jury's still out on like what the naming is going to be. Super sandal, super flip-flop, super flop. We'll get into that in a second. A new world record in Crocs for the marathon. And Hoka's just absolutely wacko loafer that they're calling the speed loafer. The shark we have jumped the shark with shoes. Okay, so like first let's talk about the super sandal. It rolls off the tongue better than super flip flop. Super
or
flip
the loafers.
Yeah, or the speed loafer.
Or anything else. Okay.
So
super
in
sandal.
Thailand last week at the Khon Kaen Marathon, I just butchered that, I'm sure. That's probably not the correct pronunciation. Kenyan runner Barnabas Kiplimo ran 2:18:56, and then you zoom in on his feet, and he's wearing a pair of slides. I don't know if that's sick or ridiculous.
You know, I saw them, and the first thing that came to mind were the sandals. You guys have both, of course, read Born to Run. So I thought of the Tarahumara sandals, I can't pronounce it correctly. Huaraches. So they have these sandals that they
Better
run.
than me.
That I saw that when I competed with the Tarahumara here in Costa Rica because they came to visit us. I saw these sandals in the flesh, and they literally looked like nothing, like almost like they were running barefoot. But what the difference between these and these super sandals, which we'll get into explaining, they have great carbon plate and everything, is that the huarachas had like something along the back to hold them onto the ankle. So I was like, okay, well, at least they're not going to flop and they're actually attached onto the foot, but these aren't. Can you imagine even just walking in flip-flops and you have to make that effort with your toes so they don't go sliding off? How the heck did he run in these?
Yeah, that's the point that I don't really get. It's like I was thinking about this and disclosure. This is like the least weird out of the 3 weird footwear parts that we're going to talk about to me, because I could get behind a shoe that doesn't really have an upper if somehow it can just stick on your foot. Because like when you look at like a really good racing shoe, the uppers are almost non-existent. The shoe that I race in, it's paper thin. It's not really doing much for you. It's kind of just there out of convention. But then it's like, obviously it has laces, and then the laces help the shoe stay on the foot. So without a mechanism to keep it on the foot, man, I don't know. My dad has this thing where he refuses to wear anything other than those old Jesus sandals with the really thick straps around the back and the toes.
Love those
because
things.
they stay on your feet. You can't wear flip-flops because he says they'll flip off. And so I'm thinking of this.
Right.
How do they make shoes that don't flip off? Yeah. I don't know, man.
Maybe there's some special engineering. This is a Thai company called Ving. And the name of the super sandal is the Nirun, I guess it would be pronounced Nirun. Got a pretty rudimentary site up right now with the sandal. Yeah, it's got a carbon plate, supercritical foam, and not a whole lot up top. And I guess that's their kind of selling point, is they're like, we've been able to shed all this weight because there is no upper. I should
not
say,
a lot going on up top could also be the way to describe what they thought of when designing this. Although maybe it's the future, right? If you can find a way to stick that to your foot, that's just a couple ounces off the top.
Now that I'm really looking at it, there is something that wraps around the top of the ankle, right? So there is something that it's not just like a complete flip-flop like I was imagining, or that I thought when I saw it the first time. There's something that kind of holds it on. But still, don't you think the work you need to do with your toes is just going to be a lot of extra energy wasted?
Katelyn
I don't know.
Almost talked herself into these shoes or sandals. Sandals. They're sandals.
Sorry, sandals.
I will give Barnabas Kiplimo, the man who ran 2:18:55 in this sandal, a lot of credit. Not only because that's a superlative time, and I'm sure Thailand is probably not the greatest conditions for running a marathon, especially given I believe it's summertime there right now. He was wearing socks with his sandals, which I know is a hyper controversial move, although not so much anymore with the kids, Alex. Your generation, you all wear socks with your sandals like you're 80 years old. But I think that's a pro move when you're running a marathon, because imagine how slippery those feet get if you didn't. Yikes. 25,000 little farting noises is what Barnabas had to suffer through when he heard the bottom of his foot pressing down on that sandal. I just did the math on that. It's about 25,000 steps in a marathon if you ran 2:18:55. So there you go. Okay, let's pivot to the next one, which lightning yellow Crocs. A man from Australia named Dan Kamak. He'd never worn Crocs before, I don't believe, or never raced in Crocs before. He ran the Cadbury Marathon in Tanzania and set a new Croc world record in the marathon. He broke 250.
Wow.
I mean, the record had just been bettered in November, and we did a story on that as well. In November in the New York City Marathon, I think it was like 251 or 252. I don't have it in front of me right now. So Dan Kamek cracked the 250 barrier in Crocs. I'm not sure what the sub 2 hour marathon is equivalent in Crocs. Is it 230? Is it 220? I don't know.
But what is his record? Does he have a PR that's faster than his Crocs record?
Gotta creep this guy.
Dan. I know the previous guy. I know the American guy from Colorado that set the previous record holder that set it in New York. We Strava stalked him, and I think it was like his PR was something like 235 or something like that. So it was about a 15, 17, 18 minute slowdown in Crocs.
I found Dan Kamak online. So his best marathon, sans Crocs, is 2:34:55. So around the same range.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, and also, I don't know, man, respect to that guy. This has become a quarterly segment for us. Every 3 months, the Crocs record is being reset. Mm-hmm. The first time I heard of the Crocs record, I kind of just didn't really care about it, because it's always a world record if you're the first person to think about doing something. But now that there seem to be a good amount of Croc runners out there, there's like some bragging rights to hold this record. And it's becoming more and more impressive. So I'm kind of like, kudos, man. Like 249 in Crocs, assuming put those in a sport mode, like put the little strap at the back. I'm pretty impressed.
You'd have to go sport mode.
Yeah, you have to.
And that's a skill in itself, because like if you think of he's taken a 15-minute cut over his personal best. If any of us tried to run a marathon full out, I think we would really struggle to run another one in Crocs within 15 minutes of our time. I think there's like an element of skill there to master.
Curious to know how much practice these guys do in the footwear. I mean, never do anything new on race day, especially wear Crocs.
I never even put on a pair of Crocs, but I imagine that there's way too much space in them. Like they must not hug your feet. Right?
Katelyn, where were you in like 2006?
Being cool, Alex. She was being cool.
Crocs. I've never put on Crocs.
Okay, so listeners and viewers on our YouTube channel who are under the age of 30, there's a dark secret out there. Anyone over the age of, say, 35, we're quietly judging you on the whole Crocs thing. Crocs are just awful. You couldn't force a pair of Crocs on me. They're just brutal. I
can't bring myself to it either. I can't. No. It's just our generation, I guess, Michael. We just can't.
I see 40-something dads sliding around in a pair of Crocs. I got a couple of friends that have gone to the Croc dark side, and I just quietly judge them. Shame on you. Your gibbets, your sport mode. Okay. Carrying on. And this is probably the greatest sin of all. Hoka has released a new, I don't know what to call this besides just what it is called. They've released something called the Speed Loafer. We will put links to all of these stories in the show notes. I highly recommend you click on this one and give it a good look if you've not seen it already, because it's been doing the rounds on social media because people are appalled by this thing. It is basically like, it's like a little like penny loafer, like a little leather loafer with the tassel and everything on top. And then it's like, I don't know, like a Hoka Clifton or a Bondi underneath. It's just absolutely bizarre. It's got a Vibram sole. Somebody is going to wear this sucker for a spring marathon just to make a statement. Love it, hate it. Alex, are you wearing you wearing these for your very first marathon next fall?
Couldn't think of something more sinful. No, I am wondering if Hoka's just taken advantage of, and I'm not meaning this in a bad way. If I were leading Hoka, I would do the same thing. But if they're taking advantage of the fact that everyone just really likes Hokas, and so now they're trying to create a Hoka for every situation in life, like, think if you're working as in healthcare, okay, you're a nurse and you're on your feet all day. What do you and your colleagues wear right now? Hokas.
Pair of Cliftons.
We're in Hokas.
Go in a hospital, like I mean, I don't wish it on anyone, but if you end up finding yourself in a hospital, look at what people are wearing. And that's the same in schools. Teachers, people wear Hokas all day. And so why not one day switch it up and put on some loafers if that goes better with your outfit? And you have the bottom that's that same comfortable, cushy Clifton feeling. No one really says you have to run in those. I think the sin is for people to accept these as an alternative type of running footwear and then wear them in marathon. I have a sneaking suspicion it's not even made for that.
I would hope not. I would hope that the good people at Hoka were like, we're just putting this out there so that the executive class can just be a touch more comfortable in the boardroom. This does remind me of like Cole Haan many years ago had a partnership with Nike where they did this nice, classy, casual, but dressy series of loafers. And they had the Lunar Lawn sole, I believe it was called Lunar Lawn, which was the midsole technology that Nike had at the time. And they would do it in these kind of like crazy colors, like a vibrant orange or like neon yellow or whatever. And it looked pretty slick. I actually had a pair, but no one in their right mind would run in these things. But I feel like we're in this moment right now where that there's like a couple of dozen dudes. It's always dudes. Why is it always dudes that are just like, yeah, New York.
This is a good idea.
New York this year. I've got an entry. I'm going speed loafer. I'm going to set the speed loafer world record. Anyway, oh man, hopefully we never see the speed loafer again in this space, but I have a sneaking suspicion that we'll be doing another segment on the loafer world record come this spring or fall. Okay, guys, let's take a quick break, and then we'll get to our main topic of the day. We're going to bring in Thomas. We're going to talk all about his super shoe dilemma. Be right back. All right, and we're back. And we are joined today by the Marathon Handbook founder, Thomas Watson. His first foray into podcasting with the three of us clowns. And the reason why we have pulled you, Thomas, into the chat is because you started writing a column, an excellent weekly column. And if you're listening and you've not followed this column, you should definitely. And this week's entry is all about a conundrum that you face regarding super shoes. So I guess the analogy for you, Thomas, would be Alex's analogy was, what was it, Alex? It was...
So Thomas was kind of like one of these guys who went into the backwoods in the United States on a 6-week long camping trip before COVID. And then by mid-April, they came out and rejoined society to come to a completely different world, not knowing what had happened or why everyone had changed.
And you experienced this with super shoes. And Katelyn is like, well, I've got a much less controversial, much sort of more idyllic version of that, which is...
Okay, let's hear Katelyn's.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Mine was being the Massachusetts girl. Okay, so for those of you who are familiar with Henry David Thoreau, okay, famous American author, went out to Walden Pond, right? He went out and lived in a cabin for a long period of time to live the simple life, to live alone and to live the simple life. And he wrote a book called Walden. And I see Thomas as with this point of view with his super shoe column, right? So Henry David Thoreau.
Katelyn, I prefer that one. And Katelyn's actually been to my house, which kind of is in the woods. And she knows that I just go running around the woods every day. So yeah, I prefer her take so far than the kind of Colorado anti-vaxxer take. But we'll see where this goes.
So tell us a little bit about this. So you've written, I guess the title of the piece is Super Shoes Don't Actually Make You Faster, it turns out, which is a provocative title. But let's unpack it a little bit. What inspired you to take on the idea that perhaps super shoes don't actually make you faster? And what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, the subheading is something like, as soon as you take them off, you're the same speed you always were, something like that. Mm. But, so, you guys have been doing a lot of the news coverage, and specifically, we were talking about the Conor Mantz half marathon new American record, which was set 9-10 days ago now. And what I pay attention to and what a lot of people like to see is this little asterisk, which is that he broke, I think it's a 14-year record that was held by Ryan Hall. But the record was broken wearing super shoes, and Ryan Hall didn't wear super shoes. And actually, the little nugget that got me thinking about this piece was, I wonder what Ryan Hall thinks of all this. So he's been the proud, holder of this record. It's now been broken. He's moved on to other things. He has. But as far as I know, he hasn't said anything publicly about this. He hasn't come out and been like, I want to initiate the non-carbon standards or something like that. So his record somehow gets held. But I thought it's an interesting discussion. And yeah, you guys talked about my background. So I was more of a competitive runner, always on the recreational end, basically until COVID. And the background there is we went and had 3 kids. Our first kid was born in May 2020. And just now I'm circling the idea of getting back into competitive half marathons and marathons. Again, at a recreational level. And this isn't obviously a novel observation that the world has changed in the last 5 to 10 years in terms of running and running shoes. But I do think there's this discussion still to be had as super shoes become more and more prevalent, and we were all at TRE, and every brand, I would say, apart from maybe a couple of the sort of bare shoe brands, has some form of super shoe out there. I think it's an interesting discussion not to forget the impact that super shoes is having on the running world, both in terms of the elite and the sub-elites, and how, I guess, the idea there would be how innovation changes a space. And then more at a recreational level, all recreational runners really have a choice they can make between super shoes and non-super shoes. And I just think it's an interesting discussion, whether or not you make that choice.
I feel like I don't have a choice, to be honest with you. I've been thinking about this a lot. I edited this piece. You and I worked pretty closely on it and had a little back and forth about it. And it got me thinking about this a lot because, first of all, my marathon personal best is pre-super shoe, which could it's like a little bit of a flex. It's like, well, if only I had super shoes on, it would be 4 minutes faster than that. But then also I'm very conflicted myself personally about wearing the shoes. And I definitely was when they were first introduced. Alex, you've only been running road races in super shoes. You've never run a road race not in super shoes, correct? Or is that not true? Because you ran when you were younger as well.
Yeah, I had a little road career before super shoes, like 2015, 2016. And then my thing is I was injured while Thomas was family planning. I was on the shelf with patellar tendonitis. And so when I came back, I quickly got back to form and tied my old personal bests, even though I'd been out for most of 2 years. So I've seen the pre and the after, and it clearly didn't take me as much work to get to my best times once the super shoes were out.
And Katelyn, you are a relatively recent super shoe adherent, right? Like, we've talked in the pod before that I think your marathon last year was the first time you ever wore super shoes in a race. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, and I feel the same way that Alex does, because my previous marathon record from a couple of years back, and then running in super shoes for the first time last year, I shaved 8 minutes off my time. And so I feel like maybe I would have been able to improve, who knows, 4 or 5 minutes, but maybe not the entire 8 minutes. So I do feel as well is I probably got a little boost from wearing super shoes. And I didn't train a lot in those super shoes. I only wore them. I got them maybe about a month before the marathon, and I wore them for a couple long runs and then just the race. So it wasn't something that I saw previously to the marathon. I just got to the marathon and I was like, wow, 8 minutes. I felt like that was a lot of time. Maybe it wouldn't, who knows, it would have been, such a large gap if I had not worn super shoes. I don't know.
Thomas, you have, of course, not been entirely living in complete hermetic isolation from the super shoe era. You do have a pair. I'm curious to know, because it was not mentioned in the piece, what shoe it is. And you said you've trained in them and you're intrigued by the upside of being able to train in a super shoe. And it's because of its incredibly fat, 40 mil stack height, supercritical foam. It allows you to maybe do like a long run and then recover pretty quickly compared to the old days. What shoe have you run in? And do you feel a huge difference? I mean, I know I do. I feel that they're I feel like they're totally cheating.
Yeah, it's the Saucony Endorphin Elite. I think it's the first model. Feels like I'm cheating. It feels like, to be honest, I haven't used it enough that I'm used to running in them. So it feels weird, like I'm overstriding and then my calves kind of ache a bit. But listen, I'm not anti-super shoe at all. I think that's maybe what the knee-jerk reaction to the piece might be. I find them very interesting. As you and I discussed, Michael, I think it's more of a genie out of the bottle scenario. And you could almost make the same an analogy with AI, which is, like it or not, AI is now here and people can use it to boost their productivity or do some work for them. The interesting question mark for me is whether you're acknowledging you're using this performance enhancer, because, going back to the old days of pre-COVID, super shoes, shoes never made a huge, shoes did make a difference, but the performance gains weren't such a big deal. I remember running marathons in the UK 15 years ago, and it was a mixed bag of shoes people were wearing. A lot of amateur runners would have seen the shoes almost as an afterthought. But now, and I get there's been innovation before in terms of both shoe performance ability and nutrition and how we train. Things have gradually got better, but there was a leap with the release and the widespread release of super shoes that changes the game. So then the question becomes, the genie's out in the bag. You can use this stuff. There's nothing wrong with using this stuff. I think my TLDR is just don't lie to yourself if you're using this stuff to get faster. Put a little asterisk onto the Strava post or the Instagram post that says new PR with super shoes.
You know, Thomas, it reminds me of something that I was thinking about in Costa Rica, and I'm sure in all countries. You have like your national list of yearly records for the country, right? The national records, the national marathon records. And we have one here that comes out and it gets updated after all the big marathons or after someone gets on the list, and it's the top 20. And on that top 20 list, there are asterisks next to the names where someone has run like a Revel marathon, or they've run a marathon where there's more net loss than there is net gain. And so it's kind of like it's a nice little punch in the stomach. Like, you got your PR, but you cheated because you ran more downhill than uphill. Or I don't know. I guess that's the way that I see it, because I ran a Revel marathon and an asterisk was next to my name, and they were just like, yeah, you're here, but you really shouldn't be here because your PR doesn't mean that much. And I was like, but it does to me.
Some stickler in Costa Rica is keeping you right.
Yeah, like that's right. That's right.
It's actually a really interesting thing to dig into is World Athletics, the international governing body of running, has a list of the all-time list for the marathon. And for one, they don't include courses like Boston, which is not, it's point to point instead of kind of going back on itself to make it even with, wind and whatever. And it's also quite a net downhill as well. So they don't count courses like that. And so for record eligible courses in the history of the marathon, the last pre-super shoe world record on the men's side was a 2:02:57 by Dennis Kimetto in 2014 in Berlin. And that's now the 18th fastest marathon in history. So 17 marathons have been run that are faster than that last pre-super shoe world record. I think that's pretty damning. And on the women's side, it's even worse. It's, I think 4 of the times out of the top 50 are pre-super shoe, and 3 of those 4 times are held by Paula Radcliffe. The other being Mary Catani, right at the end of the pre-super shoe era in 2016. And she was certainly not wearing super shoes. She was wearing those little like Adidas Adios loafers that I love and miss. Yeah, I mean, when you look at the statistics, it's pretty overwhelming. I think a really interesting thing to contemplate, and a really tough thing to contemplate as a recreational runner, is like if you're going after like a Boston qualifier, or certainly if you're going after one of those big round times like sub-4 or sub-3 in the marathon, like the truth is, if we're just sticking with the concept that it's a 4% time discount, right? Like a 2:59:59 is a 3:07:29 in the pre-super shoe era, right? So it's like a 7 and change. You have to run like I think it's a 2:52 something to make it the non-super shoe equivalent, it's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people, right? So which
just proves that everyone is wearing super shoes, right? The fact that the Boston Marathon standards have gone way down just proves that those are the new rules of the game. I think, like I was reading Thomas's line about making the decision of whether or not to be a super shoe athlete, and what came to mind was like, I don't think I met someone who decided not to be one.
Oh wow, yeah, that's I mean,
except for Thomas, who's waving in the screen.
Yeah, I haven't raced a non-super shoe race. Well, I did in 2022. I did a half marathon, but yeah. I wouldn't consider myself somebody that would be a racer, so you can ignore me.
No, but that's, I think, even for like a recreational runner, it would be absolutely absurd and like, PR suicide for like a sub elite runner like Alex, for example. You're like at the bleeding edge, at the front of the court, at the front of the start line in a lot of races. And like, you just can't not wear a super shoe, right? Like, Alex, what would it take for you to not wear a super shoe? Like some sort of weird dare?
Yeah, some sort of. I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I'm too close to. But here's the thing. Okay, I'm too close to hitting certain times that would let me do things that I really want to do. For example, getting into the actual Elite A section of a major race. I'm close to that. But that's no better or worse or different than someone who's trying to get that Boston Marathon standard,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Everybody has that like thing they want to do, even if it's just a personal goal. And so I struggle to think of the person who wouldn't want to wear super shoes. And this is where I'm more sympathetic to you, Thomas, because I think you have a pretty good grasp of what it is that you don't want to tell yourself. You don't want to be cheating to yourself. When it's a personal goal, it comes down to how you feel about your own result. And you said this earlier, and you say this in the piece, but I think the mass delusion with super shoes is not, are they faster or are they not? And therefore, that's why I think you should change your title, Thomas. I don't think it should be, they don't make you faster, because they do make you faster. The thing is, they don't make you fitter. And the delusion is thinking that they do. And so if you're comparing your time right now to your time 10 years ago, and are telling yourself, oh, I'm a minute faster, I'm 2 minutes faster, well, then you are cheating yourself. Like, when I saw your title, I got nervous that I would have to debate the actual benefits of super shoes. And I was hoping, and I didn't think you would do this, and I was hoping you were not going to hit me with it's all in your head, because I was ready to come guns blazing. It's such a game changer. But
I would love to have convinced you that it's all in your head. So then you go out your next race with a pair of
I think I would have had
shoes.
a breakdown. Yeah.
But it's a fascinating like thought experiment, right? Especially for someone like yourself, Alex, or Katelyn, chasing sub 3 hours in Boston, myself trying to hold on to not just absolutely riding off into the sunset with the marathon in terms of times. It's like, we've all made a Faustian pact with Nike and Adidas and Asics and whomever else that like, you just can't do it. You can't not. But and Thomas, you're in like this gloriously like idyllic and perhaps naive is not the right word, because you fully know what's in front of you. But like, I'd find it very tough. Do you know what you're going to do? Like, obviously you're going to run again. You're going to run a marathon, a half marathon, something again. You're going to want to try to train up to get fit. And once you're fit, we all have goals. I'm sure you've got some goals in mind. If you're close to those goals, what do you do?
I get a lot of, maybe it's just my contrarian nature, but I would get a lot of, I would feel pretty good about telling people I ran a certain race time, and they would kind of think in their head, oh, that guy's okay, but he's not that fast. But I know I didn't do it in super shoes. Does that make sense?
It's like the reverse asterisk. You're like, I ran a 3:03.
I'll maybe just slip it in 5 minutes later once they've already judged me as a slow guy. But no, you guys bring up a really good point, which I hadn't thought of, which is if I wanted to run Boston, and then it's like, I'll need a pretty good Boston qualifier. And if I didn't run in super shoes, I need to be 8 minutes faster than everybody else, basically, that's at my level.
Which is a huge amount.
Yeah. It's like, I love it, Thomas, because it's like a refreshing take on the authenticity of the sport, right? You want to like bring it back down into before using kind of these advantages and these technologies. So it's a really nice way of looking at it. And when I read your piece, I kind of took it thinking of trail running. Like when you go out on the trails, you're just, you run a lot of trail running. You're an ultra runner as well, like I am. And so it's just like, you're free. You're not looking at pace. You're basically not even using your watch to know what's going on. If it's not, for a map, I mean, why would you be looking at a pace when you're going up a 16% grade incline, for what? And so I think it kind of just brought me back to thinking, okay, just kind of making everything a little bit simpler, going back to our Thoreau analogy.
Mm-hmm. What I got from it is that, to be honest with yourself, you need to think about running times over time as like money with inflation. And it's really tough to do that, because the cool part about running is that it's meant to be objective, right? Like a 2:10 marathon 50 years ago should be a 2:10 marathon now. You got to do away with the idea, as nice as it is, because times inflate over time. Like, think of Abebe Bikila's 1960 Olympic victory in Rome, where he ran, I think, 2:15. I'm on the top of my head here, but I know for a fact he ran it with no shoes. A 2:15 these days, it's pretty good, but I have a couple friends who run that, and they're not Olympians. I think I maybe could take a crack at that one day. I'm not going to do it shoeless, and I won't do it at the Olympics either.
To take their shoes off, exactly. Yeah,
and then they don't do it. So you got to think of it as an inflation kind of thing.
And I think, Thomas, like, really kind of, as you're saying, Katelyn, like at the core of all of this, and I think a real problem that I face with this as somebody who's sort of straddled the super shoe era. And I will say right now, I am pro super shoe because I find technology fascinating. I find what they've done to the sport and the industry fascinating. It's like Nike injected a huge amount of interest and excitement into the sport in a time where it felt like it was waning in 2016, 2017. But I think kind of the core thesis here, correct me if I'm wrong here, Thomas, is that, like, especially when you take the marathon is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be this ultimate challenge. It's you against yourself in both training and in the moment of performance. And it feels like what you're implying here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that, like, the super shoe kind of takes the edge off of that challenge. Maybe.
I think that's fair to say. I think, yeah, I like people who I see judge themselves by an inner scorecard. And in a marathon, at least the marathon's pre-super shoe, your finishing time was a result of all the effort you put in on training and race day. And it came down, every second was a second hard one. And now, as I said in the piece, for $300 and nothing extra, no extra effort, you can cut minutes off that time. Which is fine. It's something that's out there. It's something we all use. It's something that's available to us. I just think, remember your inner scorecard and don't forget that you're using performance-enhancing technology. I think that's the moral of the piece.
Well, we should say that Thomas doesn't even know this yet. I've got working in the background here. We've got these various calculators on our site for pace, for marathon times. We're going to add one that adds or subtracts 4% from your time so that you can know the truth in the future. And we'll put a link to the show notes in that when we've got one of our teammates, Felix, working on that one. And Thomas's piece, which is entitled "Super Shoes Do Not Make You Faster, It Turns Out," will be linked in our show notes. It will be live by the time this podcast goes out on Thursday morning. We're recording on Tuesday morning, so it will be live by the time you are listening and watching us. Mr. Watson, thank you for joining us. You've got to come back more often. And Katelyn, Tossie, what do we got going on? We got the newsletter.
We've got a newsletter. Mm-hmm. We're at over 200,000 subscribers, right?
Yeah, it's like 20 something now. The number just keeps going up. So obviously Katelyn is one of the editors, along with Jesse, who puts out the newsletter 5 days a week, goes out at 5:05 Eastern every single morning. And we pride ourselves in putting out really good time-specific content. So say, for example, your mid-season training for a spring marathon. this morning's newsletter had a lot of content about how to help you with that, how to nail a long run, how to fuel for a long run, and that sort of thing. Mr. Sear, you're hiding out right now in Florida. Just did a nice little Miami vacation. What do we got going on the YouTube channel coming up?
We have the impossible workout. We've teased this for a while. We're getting this video just right. It's going to be out super soon. So just a primer on how to do a really tough workout, an important workout. For me, it was a half marathon build in the dead of winter, which feels far and away in my mind now that I'm in the palm trees. But we were struggling to get a good workout down in Canada. So there's a video on that. And I also put a vlog together of my experience in Houston racing the half marathon, and that should come out real soon as well. And also a Wahoo treadmill review where we go in a whole lot of depth with this treadmill.
So deeper than anybody on that one. I can guarantee that. Yeah, very deep. It's going to be a lengthy and very detailed, but very worthwhile video to watch. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining the Super Shoe Roundtable. And I'm sure we'll be talking about Super Shoes quite a bit as we go into the spring marathon season. Until next week.